You mean to tell me you spent 20 years of your life just filing papers in some military library? Elise shrieked. Her grating voice cut right through the clinking glasses and chatter of the crowd. She pointed a manicured finger dead in my face, then looped her arm tight around her husband. God, that is pathetic. My husband is CIA. He catches actual terrorists. There are levels to serving your country, Laura. Right then, her husband caught sight of the faded ink on my wrist. He grabbed his wife's arm, his face draining of all color. Before I tell you exactly what went down, take a second to like and subscribe, but only do it if this story hits home for you. Drop a comment, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Elise's living room smelled like a cheap Yankee candle trying to choke out the scent of burnt turkey grease. That and the sickeningly sweet, floral perfume she always bathed in. The house was packed with her friends. Suburbanites drinking overpriced wine out of crystal glasses I had essentially paid for. I stood near the edge of the granite kitchen island. I wore the same faded gray wool sweater I always wore. I was just reaching for a paper napkin, the sleeve hiked up. Just an inch, just enough. Ryan, her cocky Langley desk jockey husband, had an imported craft beer halfway to his mouth. His eyes locked onto the inside of my left wrist. The ink wasn't anything flashy. No eagles, no flags. Just a dull, jagged sequence of numbers over a fractured skull. A ghost tier JSOC marker. You don't get it at a local parlor. You get it burned into your skin in a bunker on the other side of the world, usually right before a mission that doesn't officially exist. Ryan stopped breathing. I watched the muscles in his jaw lock. The arrogant smirk he'd been wearing all night vanished, replaced by a pale, sickly dread. He dropped Elise's arm. Fast, like she was holding a live grenade. He took a half step back. It wasn't a casual shuffle. It was a tactical retreat. His back went rigidly straight. His heels snapped together on the hardwood floor. You could take the boy out of Quantico, but you couldn't train out the raw biological terror of realizing you were standing in the same room as an apex predator. Behind him, two of his CIA buddies, guys who had been laughing at Elise's joke a second ago, saw what he saw. They put their beers down on the coffee table. Both of them stood up, straight-backed, shoulders squared. They didn't say a word, but the air got sucked right out of the room. The background jazz music suddenly sounded way too loud. "Ma'am!" Ryan's voice was gravel, choked with genuine panic. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Colonel, I had no idea. I swear to God I didn't know." Elise blinked. The heavy layers of foundation on her face suddenly looked like a cheap plastic mask cracking down the middle. Her brain couldn't process the visual in front of her. Her husband, the hotshot intelligence officer, was standing at strict attention for the sister she treated like a doormat. Her smile froze. She jerked her hand back, hitting her hip hard against the edge of the granite island. "Are you insane?" Elise shrieked. Her voice cracked, pitching up into an ugly, shrill noise. "Ryan, who? Her?" She pointed at me again, her finger trembling with a mix of confusion and sudden blinding rage. "She does admin. She told me she does paperwork." Ryan didn't even look at her. He didn't blink. He physically shifted his body, stepping sideways to place himself directly between me and his wife. A human shield. Not to protect me from her. To protect her from me. "Your sister doesn't file papers, Elise." Ryan said, his voice dead serious, never taking his eyes off mine. "She runs the black sites. She's the only reason our operations even exist." Dead silence. The kind of heavy, suffocating quiet you only hear in a trench right before the artillery hits. Every eye in the room was pinned on me. The smug neighbors, the terrified agents. My sister hyperventilating in her tight designer dress. I didn't yell. Yelling means you lost control. Yelling means you care. I picked up my water glass. Condensation dripped down the sides, freezing against the thick calluses on my palms. I set it down on the stone counter. Clack. The sound snapped through the room like a gunshot. I looked dead at Elise. "I never lied," I said. My voice was flat, zero inflection, just cold, hard volume that cut the room in half. "You assumed. You never asked what I did because you didn't want to know. You just needed someone you thought was beneath you. A punching bag to trample on just to cover up how completely empty your own pathetic life is." Elise opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her chest heaved, but the fight was gone. The illusion was shattered. Target destroyed. I grabbed my worn gray sweater off the back of the bar stool. I didn't rush. I slipped it on, adjusting the collar. Ryan stood there, sweat gleaming on his upper lip, his eyes silently begging for a mercy I didn't have to give. His two buddies were staring a hole into the floorboards. I ignored them. A general doesn't waste breath on civilians playing dress-up. I turned my back on the entire room. I walked down the hall, opened the heavy oak front door, and stepped out into the freezing Virginia night. I didn't look back. I just let the heavy doors slam shut, sealing them inside their dead, silent little world. The wind bit into my cheeks. Frost crunched under my boots as I walked down the long driveway. I hit the unlock button on my key fob. The headlights of my beat-up F250 flashed in the dark. I yanked the heavy steel door open, climbed into the cab, and slammed it shut. The truck smelled like stale black coffee and old leather. It was freezing inside. Complete pitch-black darkness. I gripped the cold steering wheel with both hands, staring out through the windshield at the empty suburban street. My knuckles turned white, and in that freezing silent dark, the 20 years of blood, dirt, and lies I swallowed to pay for that damn house came rushing back. The yellow glow of the highway light swept across the cab of my F250 in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. I-95 was dead empty. Just me, the cold dark, and the low rattling hum of a diesel engine that had seen too many miles. I gripped the worn leather steering wheel. My knuckles were bone white. The heater blew a weak stream of lukewarm air against my face, but I could not stop the chill sinking into my ribs. The scene in Elise's kitchen kept playing on a loop. Ryan snapping to attention. The absolute terror in his eyes. Elise's face cracking under the weight of a reality she never bothered to understand. I kept my eyes locked on the road. Over the last 20 years, I built a small fortune. You do not spend much when you are deployed for 9 months out of the year. Combat drops, black sites. The hazard pay piles up fast when your bed is a cot over a dirt floor and your meals come out of vacuum-sealed bags. I had money, and I bled it out for them. Every single cent of it went to keeping that family afloat. Mom's unexpected hospital bills covered. Elise's maxed-out credit cards from her finding herself phases wiped clean. The very roof over their heads, paid for by me. I never asked for a parade. I never even asked for a thank you. I just handled the mission. The smell of stale black coffee in my cup holder seemed to shift, turning heavy. Bitter. It morphed into the scent of burning diesel and dry choking dust. The memory hit me hard. 3 years ago. An unnamed outpost 50 miles from the Syrian border. The ground beneath my combat boots was violently shaking. Mortar rounds were walking their way toward our perimeter. Dust and loose concrete rained down from the bunker ceiling. I was sitting on a wooden ammo crate, pressing a satellite phone hard against my ear to drown out the artillery fire. Elise was on the other end, sobbing hysterically. Her roof was leaking. The contractor was demanding cash up front. She was going to lose her house to water damage. She was terrified. I wiped a mix of sweat and grit from my forehead. I pulled up my banking app on a scrambled tablet. I hit transfer. $5,000. Hazard pay. Blood money. I earned that specific deposit by pulling my communications specialist out of a burning Humvee 2 days prior. I ate instant noodles and drank iodine-tasting water for the next month to cover the gap in my own accounts. 4 weeks later, the network came back up. I logged on for a quick welfare check. The first thing on my feed was Elise. She was not standing under a patched roof. She was standing on a sun-drenched balcony overlooking the ocean in Cabo San Lucas. She wore a pristine, expensive white sundress. A crystal flute of champagne rested in her perfectly manicured hand. Standing right next to her, with his arm wrapped around her waist, was Ryan, the new boyfriend, the hotshot CIA guy. The caption read, "Living my best life." So incredibly blessed. I pressed my heavy work boot harder against the gas pedal. The truck engine roared, eating up the dark asphalt. I remembered calling my mother about it. I remembered the static on the line standing in the blistering desert heat. I did not yell. I just asked for an explanation. My mother's voice whined through the receiver, dripping with that familiar manipulative guilt. You have money, Laura. You do not even spend it out there. Elise is struggling. Her job is unstable. You are a soldier. You are strong enough to carry the load. Just yield a little. Let your sister have this one thing. The logic of a leech. They weaponized my sense of duty. They took my silence, my discipline, and they branded it as weakness. They forced me to become a gray invisible shadow so Elise could steal the spotlight. I paid for the stage she stood on, and she used it to spit on me. I hit the brakes. The massive steel barriers of Joint Base Andrews cut through the night. Blinding white security floodlights washed over the hood of my truck. I rolled the window down. The freezing Virginia air hit my face like a slap. The sharp smell of aviation fuel mixed with the winter frost. Two young Air Force security guards approached the checkpoint, rifles slung tight and ready across their tactical vests. They swept their flashlights over the grill of the Ford, then stepped up to my window. I held out my military ECD. The shift was instantaneous. The flashlight clicked off. Both guards snapped their spines rigidly straight. Their heavy boots cracked sharply against the cold concrete. They threw perfect synchronized salutes. The kind of tight, disciplined respect you cannot buy with a resort vacation. "Welcome back, Colonel." I returned the salute with a short, sharp nod. I rolled the window up. How long had it been since I was actually respected? Since someone looked at me and saw a human being, a commander, instead of a walking ATM. If you have ever been the financial backbone of your family bleeding yourself dry, just to be treated like garbage, hit the like button and subscribe right now. Drop the word USD in the comments if you know exactly how it feels to buy someone else's fake happiness while they tear you down. Let me know I am not the only one out here. I drove the truck slowly through the heavy iron gates. The steel barriers rolled shut behind me, locking out the civilian world. I was inside the wire, my own solitary, quiet fortress. I pulled into the empty parking lot outside the senior officer's quarters. I killed the engine. The cab went dead silent. I reached for the door handle, but before my fingers even touched the cold plastic, the encrypted red phone sitting in my passenger seat lit up the dark. Incoming transmission. From the Pentagon. 2 a.m. The base gym was dead empty. I did not bother hitting the light switch. The pale moonlight cutting through the high frosted windows was enough. The air inside smelled like stale sweat chalk and heavy rubber mats. It was a good smell. Honest. Unlike the suffocating, sickly floral perfume Elise drenched herself in a few hours ago. I walked over to the squat rack. My heavy boots echoed against the cinder block walls. I grabbed a 45-pound iron plate, slid it onto the Olympic barbell. Clang. Then another. Clang. The harsh, jagged sound of metal hitting metal ripped through the quiet room. I needed the weight. I needed something heavy enough to crush the noise echoing inside my skull. I stepped under the bar. I rested the freezing cold steel across my traps. My hands gripped the knurling, the rough texture biting into my thick calluses. I took a deep breath, unracked the weight, and stepped back. I went down deep. Pushed up. My leg muscles screamed. The salt of my own sweat burned my eyes, leaving a bitter metallic taste in the back of my throat. Down again. Up. My breath punched out of my lungs in short, violent bursts. In the military, they teach you how to absorb pain. You learn how to swallow it whole. I took a 7.62 round to the shoulder in a godforsaken ditch in Helmand Province, and I did not even make a sound. A soldier can eat lead, pack the wound with gauze, and keep firing. But family. That is a completely different battle space. You drop your guard. You let them inside the wire. You let the people who share your blood carve you up with a dull knife, and you just stand there and bleed. I racked the weight. Hard. The whole steel cage shook. I grabbed a ragged towel and wiped my face. I stared at my own dark silhouette in the mirrored wall. Extreme ownership. It is a doctrine. Jocko Willink hammered it into a generation of warfighters. The concept is brutal and simple. When a defensive perimeter collapses, you do not blame the enemy for shooting at you. That is what the enemy does. You blame the commander for leaving a gap in the wire. Tonight, I was the commander. And I had failed. Miserably. I spent 20 years letting Elise treat me like a stray dog. I handed over my hazard pay to fund her fake, glamorous lifestyle. I kept my mouth shut at Thanksgiving dinners while she mocked my clothes. I made myself small, quiet, and invisible so she could feel big. I thought I was keeping the peace. I thought I was doing my duty as the older sister. Bullshit. I was just a coward. The security breach was not Elise's raging narcissism. It was my own weak, pathetic compliance. I tolerated the disrespect. I funded my own humiliation. Every time I hit transfer on my banking app, I was handing her the ammunition to shoot me in the back. No more. The victim mentality was dead on the floor. I am an apex predator. I dictate the terms of engagement. I left the gym and walked back to the officer quarters. My boots scuffed against the bare concrete walkway. I keyed into my room and pushed the heavy door open. Dead silence. Absolute sterile perfection. There were no family photos on the walls. No throw pillows. No little knickknacks to make it feel warm or inviting. Just a neatly made bed with tight hospital corners. A metal desk. A steel footlocker sitting at the foot of the bed. Inside that heavy locker sat a pile of tarnished combat ribbons, a purple heart, and a silver star. Things my mother had never once bothered to ask the names of. She did not care if I bled in the sand for this country. She only cared that the direct deposits hit her checking account on the first of the month so she could keep Elise from throwing a tantrum. I stripped off my soaked, heavy gym clothes. I left them in a pile on the cold linoleum floor. I walked into the bathroom and grabbed the shower handle. I twisted it all the way to cold. No hot water. I did not deserve comfort tonight. I stepped under the spray. The water was like liquid ice. It hit the puckered, jagged scar tissue on my left shoulder like 100 tiny needles. The bullet wound. The one I never mentioned at home because nobody ever asked. I stood there gripping the tiled wall. I let the freezing water run over my head down my neck, shocking my nervous system back to absolute reality. I let the cold freeze out whatever lingering toxic guilt my mother had installed in my brain. I turned the water off. I grabbed a rough white government-issue towel and dried off. The air in the room was freezing, but I did not feel it anymore. I pulled a plain olive-drab army t-shirt over my head. I walked out of the bathroom, tossing the damp towel onto the desk chair. Out of the corner of my eye, a sudden flash of light cut through the dark room. I stopped dead in my tracks. Sitting on the small metal nightstand was the secure terminal equipment, the heavy encrypted landline. A single red light on the console was flashing. Frantic. Urgent. Nobody calls that secure line to ask for a favor. Nobody calls that line to complain about a leaking roof or a maxed-out credit card. That line connects straight to the basement of the Pentagon. I stared at the blinking red light. My heart rate slowed down to a calm, steady rhythm. The civilian games were over. A real war was waiting for me. The red light on the secure terminal equipment pulsed. A steady, violent heartbeat in the dark room. I stared at it. You do not get a call on this line at 3 a.m. to chat about the weather. You get a call on this line when something is burning, bleeding, or broken. I picked up the heavy plastic receiver, pressed it to my ear. Brown. Laura. The voice on the other end sounded like a rusted blade dragging across a piece of flint. General Thomas Keene, 4 stars, combat veteran, the man who physically pulled me by the heavy nylon straps of my plate carrier out of a burning command tent in Fallujah 12 years ago. I stood up straight, barefoot on the freezing linoleum floor, shoulders squared, muscle memory took over. Sir. I just got off the horn with the director over at Langley, Keene said. No greeting, no small talk. Word is there was a situation at a civilian gathering in Virginia tonight. Some desk jockey had a panic attack because he recognized your JSOC Inc. Spilled your clearance level in front of a room full of suburbanites. I clenched my jaw. The intelligence community is a small, tight town. Gossip moves faster than a shockwave. The situation is handled, General, I said. My voice was flat. A personal boundary issue. Nothing compromised. No threat to operations. A long, heavy pause on the line. I could hear him breathing, steady and slow, the sound of a man calculating his next strike. In this uniform, you are an apex predator, Keene rumbled. The gravel in his voice dropped an octave. You lead operators into the darkest corners of this earth. You make calls that keep those civilians safe while they sleep. You do not go home and act like a sheep for people who do not know the cost of the dirt they stand on. Fix your perimeter, Colonel. Establish order. Copy that, sir. The line went dead. I placed the receiver back onto the cradle. The heavy plastic clicked into place. Before I could even turn around, the heavy steel door to my quarters clicked open. 2 short, sharp knocks. Captain Layla Moreno walked in. She wore perfectly pressed OCP camouflage, boots polished to a dull matte black. She did not ask if I was awake. She did not ask how I felt. She just walked straight to the metal desk and set down a steaming styrofoam cup. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. Just hot, bitter tar. Exactly how I take it. She dropped a thick manila folder next to the cup. Colonel, Moreno said. Her dark eyes scanned the room, making sure the perimeter was secure before she looked at me. I cleared your morning. Every briefing that does not require your direct signature has been pushed to next week. The wing commander has been notified that you are handling an internal logistics issue. You have the next 48 hours clear. I looked at her. Moreno had been my shadow for 3 years. She took shrapnel in her left leg during a convoy ambush in Kabul and still managed to lay down covering fire so I could drag our bleeding medic to safety. She knew me better than anyone. She did not pry. She did not ask about my sister. She did not need the messy emotional details of a ruined Thanksgiving dinner. She just saw a roadblock in my path and brought a bulldozer to clear it out. Thank you, Layla. She gave a single sharp nod. I will be at the Tactical Operations Center if you need me to burn anything down, sir. She turned on her heel and walked out. The steel door latched shut behind her with a heavy metallic thud. I picked up the styrofoam cup. The heat seeped through the cheap material, warming my stiff, calloused fingers. I took a drink. It was scalding, bitter enough to strip the paint off a Humvee. It was the best thing I had tasted all night. I leaned against the cold metal edge of the desk. This was it. This was my actual bloodline. Out there in the civilian world, my own mother and sister looked at me and saw nothing but a bank account, a dumping ground for their insecurities, a quiet gray ATM they could kick whenever they felt small. They shared my DNA, but they would happily watch me bleed out if it meant they could keep their comfortable, ignorant lives. They took my hazard pay and bought designer dresses. But here, in this sterile concrete box, I was surrounded by a brotherhood forged in heavy artillery and dirt. Keene. Moreno. People who did not care how much money I made. People who would step in front of a moving bullet for me simply because I wore the same flag on my right shoulder. They gave me oxygen when I was drowning. They handed me a weapon when I was backed into a corner. They demanded respect, and they returned it tenfold. I took another slow, burning sip of the coffee. The knot in my chest, the one that had been pulling tight for 20 years, finally started to snap. The guilt was gone. The obligation was dead. The sky outside the reinforced window began to turn a bruised, sickly shade of gray. Morning was coming. The freezing night was finally breaking. I walked over to the bed to grab my boots. That is when I heard it. A low, pathetic, vibrating buzz. It was not the encrypted military line. It was my personal cell phone lying face down on the thin mattress. It buzzed, stopped, buzzed again. A frantic, desperate rhythm. Like a trapped insect beating itself to death against a windshield. I picked it up and flipped it over. The harsh glare of the screen lit up my face in the dim room. 15 missed calls. A solid wall of red notifications. 7 new voicemails. Every single one of them was from the exact same contact. Mom. She was not calling to ask if I was okay. She was not calling to apologize for Elise humiliating me in front of a room full of strangers. She was not calling to check on the daughter who paid her hospital bills. I knew exactly what was sitting in those voicemails. The crying, the guilt tripping, the heavy suffocating manipulation designed to drag me back to the bottom of the food chain. She was getting ready to defend her golden child. I stared at the glowing screen. I did not hit accept. I did not hit decline. I just watched it buzz. The real psychological war was about to begin. I sat at the steel desk in my quarters. The aluminum surface was freezing against my bare elbows. I dragged the thick stack of tactical reports toward me. Pages filled with grid coordinates, hostile threat assessments, and casualty projections. Heavy, brutal facts. The kind of facts that actually mattered. My personal cell phone sat right next to the files. The screen was still glowing in the dim light. 15 missed calls, 7 voicemails, all Mom. I reached out. My finger hovered over the glass. I did not want to press it. But you do not leave an enemy flanking your rear. You confront them. You eliminate the threat. I hit the speaker button. I tapped the first voicemail. Static hissed through the tiny speaker. Then, her voice. It was not worried. It was sharp, frantic, dripping with that heavy, suffocating guilt she always used to keep me in line. Laura, pick up the phone. You completely ruined Thanksgiving. I picked up a black ink pen, uncapped it. Elise is having a total breakdown. The voice continued cracking with manufactured panic. She has been crying all night. Ryan packed a bag and went to sleep on the couch. He will not even look at her. You are the older sister, Laura. Why on earth would you embarrass her in front of his CIA friends like that? I stopped writing. I stared at the dark blue ink bleeding into the paper. Not a single question about me. Not one word asking how deep the knife went when my own flesh and blood called me a pathetic librarian in front of a room full of strangers. The audio skipped to the next message. More of the same. The classic family playbook. Force the victim to apologize to the abuser just to keep the ugly truth locked in the closet. Protect the golden child at all costs. Let the scapegoat take the hit. My jaw locked. The sheer audacity of it burned like battery acid in my chest. 7 years ago, I was lying in a sterile bed at a military hospital. I had a jagged piece of shrapnel sitting 2 inches from my spine. The pain was blinding. I needed an emergency extraction. I called my mother from a secure line. I needed her there. I was terrified. She did not come. She told me she was too busy. She could not miss a suburban cocktail party she had planned with the neighbors. I signed my own surgical consent forms with a shaking hand. I went under the knife alone. I woke up alone to the smell of bleach and the steady indifferent beep of a heart monitor. And now she was demanding I fall on my sword because Elise was embarrassed by her own stupidity. Because Elise was crying over a ruined dinner party. The phone buzzed in my hand, an incoming call. Mom. Again. I hit accept. I dropped the phone back onto the cold metal desk. I let her speak first. Laura, she was practically screaming. Tell me you are driving back here right now to fix this. Mom. My voice was flat, heavy as lead. Do not use that tone with me. Your sister is fragile. I did not embarrass her, I said. My eyes tracked the cold, hard lines of the metal desk. Her own arrogant ignorance did that. It blew up in her face. Am I supposed to apologize for not hiding my rank just so she can keep stepping on my neck? A sharp intake of breath over the line. She choked on her own words. I had never spoken to her like that. I had always taken the hit. Then came the pivot. The tears. The ultimate weapon of the enabler. But she did not mean it to sound malicious. Mom sobbed. It sounded hollow, rehearsed. You know how she gets when she is stressed. Family is supposed to compromise. You have to yield, Laura. I felt nothing. No anger, no guilt. I used the gray rock method. You cut off the emotional supply. You become a stone, unmovable, boring, dead to their manipulation. I stared at the blank wall, my heart rate steady. Intent does not matter, I said. My voice dropped all inflection. Pure ice. Consequences matter. I compromised for 20 years. I paid her debts. I took her insults. I gave up my peace to buy her respect. All it got me was absolute contempt. Laura, please, you are tearing this family apart. I am not lowering my value to serve her weakness anymore. I did not wait for the screaming to start. I did not wait for the next wave of fake tears. My thumb hit the red button. Click. The call died. The static vanished. The sterile, quiet air of the military quarters rushed back in to fill the room. I dropped the phone onto the desk. The tumor had to be cut out at the root. You do not negotiate with a parasite, you starve it out. You isolate it. 3 days had passed since Thanksgiving, 72 hours. That was exactly enough time for the adrenaline to fade and the real fear to set in. Ryan was punishing her. Her perfect suburban illusion was cracking. She was desperate. I unlocked my phone screen. I opened the text thread with Elise. I did not type a greeting. I did not ask how she was doing. I did not offer a shoulder to cry on. I typed exactly 11 words. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Oak Diner on Route 50. Come alone. I hit send. I tossed the device onto the mattress. It was done. The Oak Diner on Route 50 smelled exactly the way it did 15 years ago. A thick, heavy mixture of burnt coffee, cheap bacon grease, and industrial floor cleaner. I arrived 20 minutes early. I bypassed the open tables near the windows and chose a tight booth in the far back corner. I slid in, pressing my spine flat against the cheap faux wood paneling. My eyes were locked dead on the front entrance. It is an old habit you pick up in a hostile sector. You never put your back to a door. I ordered a black coffee. The heavy ceramic mug they gave me was chipped at the rim. I traced the rough, broken edge with my thumb feeling the sharp imperfection. 15 years ago, we sat at this exact same table. Elise was crying about her tuition. I had just gotten my first real military paycheck. I pulled a crisp $100 bill out of my wallet and shoved it across this very table into her hands. It was the last dollar I had to my name. I ate government combat rations for 2 weeks so she could stay in her classes. Today, I was not handing out cash. I was handing out a reality check. The rusted bell above the diner door jingled. Elise walked in. She looked terrible. The confident, arrogant suburban queen from Thanksgiving was completely gone. Her hair was pulled back into a messy knot. She wore a baggy gray sweatshirt. No expensive floral perfume today. The skin under her eyes was puffy and dark. Her mascara was smudged, leaving dirty, wet gray shadows on her cheeks. The loss of her audience had completely broken her. She spotted me. She dragged her feet across the scuffed, checkered tiles and slid into the vinyl booth opposite me. The seat squeaked under her weight. She did not order anything. She just stared at my combat boots, then up at my face. She took a ragged, heavy breath. She went straight for the only weapon she had left. The victim card. "Are you happy now?" Elise choked out. Her voice was weak, trembling. "You completely destroyed my life." Ryan moved into the guest room. He will not even look at me. I did not blink. I picked up the metal spoon and slowly stirred my black coffee. "You set me up," she hissed. Her voice was a desperate, wet rasp. She leaned over the table, invading my space. A frantic, ugly look contorted her features. "You purposely lied to me about your job. You let me make a fool of myself. Why did you just stand there and let me say those stupid things in front of my husband?" I dropped the metal spoon. Clink. It hit the ceramic saucer with a sharp, heavy sound. "I never lied to you," I said. My voice was low, measured. I used the exact tone I use when interrogating a hostile combatant. "My security clearance is a military secret. I do not discuss classified operations with civilians." Elise flinched. The coldness in my voice physically pushed her back against the vinyl seat. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the sticky table. "Ryan stood at strict attention in that kitchen because he has actually been in the dirt," I said, locking my eyes onto hers. "He knows the actual price of blood. He respects the rank. You are just furious because the truth took away your favorite punching bag. You lost the cheap floor mat you used to wipe your feet on just to elevate your own worth." She opened her mouth. Her chest heaved. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw a tantrum like she always did when Mom was around to protect her. But Mom was not here. I hit her again. A surgical strike right to the ego. "You never once asked me what I actually did for a living," I said, my words slicing through the thick diner air. "You did not want to know. You needed me to be poor. You needed me to be a failure. You used your husband's badge as a shiny piece of jewelry to hide the fact that your own career is a pathetic joke. You called me a librarian because you needed someone to look down on." It was a kill shot. Elise physically folded. Her shoulders collapsed. Her hands grabbed the edge of the Formica table, her knuckles turning white as she shook uncontrollably. The narcissistic wall in her brain finally shattered. She had nothing left to say. No lies left to spin. I watched her cry. I did not reach across the table. I did not offer her a paper napkin. If you have ever had to look a toxic family member in the eye and finally shut down their lies, do me a favor. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop the word "done" in the comments if you know exactly how it feels to finally walk away from the guilt trips. Let me know I am not fighting this war alone. I stood up. My heavy boots thudded against the floor. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. I slapped it down hard on the table right in front of her shaking hands. "I love you," I said, looking down at her. "But I love my dignity a hell of a lot more. You are going to learn how to respect me. If you do not, I will eliminate you from my life like erasing a target." I did not wait for an answer. I turned my back, pushed open the heavy glass door, and walked out into the freezing morning air. Mission accomplished. I was halfway to my Ford truck when the cell phone in my jacket pocket started vibrating. I pulled it out, expecting to see a frantic text from Elise or another manipulative voicemail from Mom. I looked at the screen. The caller ID glowed in the gray daylight. It was not my mother. It was Special Agent Ryan Turner. 2 weeks, 14 days since I dropped that $20 bill on the diner table and walked out. I buried myself in the concrete basement of the Pentagon. The sub-level operations bunker was a sensory deprivation chamber. No sunlight, no windows. Just the constant low-frequency hum of massive server racks, the smell of ozone, and the biting chill of industrial air conditioning. It was exactly what I needed. I pulled double shifts. I reviewed thermal drone footage, verified grid coordinates, and prepped the logistics for my next forward deployment. I drank black coffee until my hands shook. If I kept my brain running at maximum capacity, there was no room left to think about the dead space where my family used to be. Captain Moreno ran a tight perimeter. She sat at the steel desk outside my reinforced door, systematically intercepting the fallout. Every call from my mother's Virginia area code hit a brick wall. Moreno did not even pass along the messages. She just hit delete. The silence was heavy. I assumed the casualty was permanent. I assumed I had permanently lost my sister to her own delusions. I was staring at a blue radar readout, my eyes burning from screen fatigue, when the secure encrypted line on my desk lit up. Not the civilian cell phone, the heavy black plastic terminal. I picked up the receiver. "Brown." "Colonel?" The voice was low, measured, scrubbed of all the arrogant suburban frat boy energy from Thanksgiving. It was Ryan Turner. My spine went rigid. I did not speak. I waited. In an interrogation, silence is a crowbar. You let the other person use it to pry open their own mouth. "I am calling to give you a situation report," Ryan said. The line hissed with a thick layer of encryption static. He sounded tired, like a guy who had just walked out of a 3-day firefight. "Go ahead," I said. "I banned Elise from all agency functions," Ryan stated, flat, factual. "She does not come to the holiday parties. She does not come to the charity dinners. I cannot afford to have a liability on my arm. A spouse who cannot keep her mouth shut and suffers from delusions of grandeur is a national security risk." I leaned back in the heavy leather chair. The joints squeaked loudly in the quiet room. "But more importantly," Ryan continued, his voice dropping a fraction, "I will not tolerate how she treated you. Not in my house, not under my name." I traced the cold edge of my metal desk with my thumb. This was the guy who watched his wife treat me like a stray dog for 2 years. Now he was acting like a field operative, neutralizing a domestic threat. "What is your objective here, Turner?" I asked. Sharp, no bullshit. "Damage control," he replied. I gave Elise an ultimatum. She goes to an agency-cleared shrink, or I file the divorce papers on Monday morning. I told her to pack a bag and get out if she refused. My hand stopped moving. I stared at the blank concrete wall. "She went," Ryan said. 3 sessions in 2 weeks. The shrink sent me the preliminary assessment. Elise is severely compromised. He paused. The quiet hum of the servers filled the dead air. She has a crippling inferiority complex, Colonel. Ryan said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. The doctor laid it out in black and white. Elise knows exactly what you are. She knows you are outstanding. She knows you survived things she could never even comprehend. It terrifies her. So she had to build a fake universe where she was the winner. She had to drag you through the mud to mean your job and use my badge as a prop just to make herself feel big. It is a textbook narcissistic defense mechanism. I stopped breathing for a second. For 20 years, my mother drilled the same lie into my skull. You are too hard, Laura. You are too cold. You are the reason Elise acts out. You just do not know how to be a normal sister. I carried that heavy, ugly rock around my neck for decades. Now sitting in this freezing bunker, a licensed medical professional and a CIA agent had just taken a sledgehammer to it. The paper trail proved it. The diagnosis was official. I was not the villain. I was not the instigator. I was the target of a pathetic, hollow jealousy. A massive, suffocating weight dissolved in my chest. She broke down, Ryan said. The doctor stripped away her entire narrative. She has nothing left to hide behind. She hit rock bottom. And, I asked. My tone was neutral, but my grip on the receiver tightened. Christmas is in 10 days, Ryan said. It was not a demand. It was a careful, calculated request. An olive branch extended across a minefield. Would you authorize Elise and me to come pick you up at the base? We do not want you driving to your mother's house alone. Elise has something she needs to give you. A physical object, a surrender token. I looked at the glowing blue monitor on my desk. I thought about the bitter coffee at the Oak Diner, the $20 bill I slammed on the table. I clicked the mouse, closing the tactical file in front of me. Affirmative, I said. My voice was steady, but the steel was still there. You can come to the base, but remember one thing, Turner. What is that, Colonel? The perimeter is mine. Christmas Eve, a brutal nor'easter buried Virginia in 2 feet of snow. I stood under the harsh halogen floodlights of the Joint Base Andrews security checkpoint. The wind was a physical force cutting right through the thick wool of my winter coat. I didn't move. I just watched the heavy iron gate, listening to the frozen sleet ping against the metal guardhouse. A black SUV rolled out of the whiteout conditions. Ryan's car. The heavy V8 engine rumbled low and steady, idling in the freezing cold. They didn't make me drive the hour to Mom's house this year. They didn't demand I show up early to help cook or set the table. They drove through a blizzard to my territory. The SUV shifted into park. The passenger door popped open. Elise stepped out into the freezing wind. She didn't march up to the gate like she owned the place. She shrank against the blowing snow, stepping half behind Ryan's broad shoulders. The 2 Air Force guards at the gate saw me step forward. They didn't care about the snow or the freezing temperatures. They snapped their boots together, hard. Their heavy rifles slapped tight against their tactical vests. A perfect, crisp salute. I returned it, sharp and clean. Elise stopped dead in her tracks. She stared at the black barrels of the rifles. Then her eyes shifted to my uniform. There was no sneer on her face, no arrogant eye roll. Just raw, naked awe. She looked terrified, and for the first time in 20 years, she looked respectful. The drive to Mom's house was dead quiet. The only sound was the heavy thud of the windshield wipers pushing thick slush off the glass. Dinner was a ghost town. The dining room felt completely different. No loud jazz music playing in the background. No crystal glasses clinking. No obnoxious bragging stories about the CIA. Just the heavy scrape of silverware against porcelain plates. Mom kept her head down. She pushed a piece of dry turkey around her plate with a fork. She didn't look me in the eye. She didn't say a single word about my hazard pay. She didn't ask for a dime to cover a credit card bill. The ATM was permanently closed, and she knew it. The power dynamic had violently shifted, and she was terrified of triggering another landmine. I sat at the head of the table, back straight, shoulders squared, watching the room. I ate my food in silence. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed. Midnight. Elise pushed her chair back. It scraped loud against the hardwood floor. She stood up. She looked hollowed out. She had dropped weight. She wore a plain gray sweater. No flashy jewelry. no thick, suffocating floral perfume choking the air out of the room. Her hands shook. She walked around the long wooden table, her head bowed. She stopped right next to my chair and set a small velvet-covered wooden box on the table. I looked at the box. I didn't reach for it. You don't blindly grab an unknown package in the field. Open it, Ryan said softly from the other side of the table. I reached out. My calloused thumb popped the brass latch. Inside sat a cheap tarnished metal picture frame. I pulled it out. The glass was freezing cold against my fingers. I turned it over. The edges of the photo were frayed and yellowing. It was me. 20 years ago, standing in the driveway wearing a baggy, oversized ROTC cadet uniform. Standing right next to me in the picture was Elise, 14 years old. Both of her hands were wrapped tight around my arm. She was looking up at my face. Her eyes weren't full of jealousy, spite, or venom. They were shining. Pure, unfiltered admiration. I found it at the bottom of Mom's old trunk, Elise whispered. Her voice cracked, a jagged, ugly sound. I looked up at her. A single hot tear cut through the pale skin on her cheek. I used to think you were a hero. She sobbed, her shoulders violently shaking. You were the strongest person I ever knew. I wanted to be just like you, until I realized I couldn't. She grabbed the edge of the dining table, her knuckles turning white just to keep herself from collapsing. So I tore you down instead. She gasped, the words tearing out of her throat. I turned myself into a monster just so I wouldn't feel so small. I am so sorry, Laura. I am so damn sorry that I trampled on you. Or the heavy iron knot in my chest, the one I had carried through 2 decades of insult and bank transfers, finally snapped. A great commander knows how to neutralize a hostile threat. You pull the trigger and you eliminate the target. But a true leader knows when to lower the weapon and pull a hostage out of the rubble. Elise wasn't a threat anymore. The narcissistic wall was completely demolished. She was just a broken kid who got lost in her own ego. I pushed my chair back. My boots thudded against the hardwood. I stood up. I didn't say a word. I just reached out and pulled my skinny, trembling sister into my chest. She buried her face in my shoulder and cried. Hard, ugly, desperate tears spilling into the fabric of my shirt. I felt her arms wrap around my ribs, gripping me like she was drowning. The steel boundary I built was still there. It would always be there. But inside the wire, the bloodline was finally clean. We survived the night. We ate the rest of the meal in a quiet, exhausted peace. But peace is a luxury you lease. It is not something you own. 6 hours later, the sun broke through the gray winter clouds over Virginia. I stood in the narrow hallway of my quiet quarters on the base. I zipped the heavy canvas of my olive-drab duffel bag. I grabbed the thick nylon straps and dragged it across the floor toward the heavy steel door. The country was calling my name. January hit hard. The rotation orders ripped me out of the freezing Virginia winter and dropped me straight into a blast furnace, a forward command outpost in the Middle East. The air up top tasted like dry sand, diesel exhaust, and spent brace. But I did not spend much time on the surface. I lived 100 feet underground. A concrete bunker reinforced with thick steel beams and heavy lead lining. 6 months. That was the deployment. 6 months buried in the dark, bathed in the sickly blue light of radar screens and satellite uplinks. The noise down there never stopped. The harsh, static crackle of the tactical radios, the muffled rhythmic thud of outgoing artillery vibrating through the floorboards, the heavy hum of the industrial air scrubbers trying to push breathable air into a concrete tomb. Out here, you do not hesitate. You look at a glowing green dot on a monitor, you verify the hostile signature, and you call in the strike. You erase threats. There is zero room for weakness, zero room for second guessing. You either make the right call, or someone comes home in a flag-draped casket. I walked to the back of the bunker. The 12-hour shift was finally over. I sat heavily on the edge of my canvas cot. My heavy boots ground into the fine layer of dust covering the concrete floor. I reached into my tactical vest and pulled out the heavy satellite phone. For 20 years, checking my messages was like waiting for a roadside bomb to detonate. It was always a crisis, a maxed-out credit card, a sudden hospital bill. My mother whining about how I needed to compromise, Elise demanding another cash transfer to fund her fake suburban royalty act. Every single time that screen lit up, it cost me pieces of my own sanity. I unlocked the screen, one new message. Elise, I braced my shoulders. I tightened my grip on the plastic casing. I expected the hook. I expected the demand for money. I opened the text. It is cold here today. Make sure you stay warm. Ryan and I are doing fine. Be safe. That was it. No passive-aggressive guilt trip, no gaslighting, no attached invoice for a leaking roof or a luxury vacation. Just a plain, simple message from a sister. I stared at the glowing letters in the dark. The toxic, suffocating tumor that had been sitting in my chest for 2 decades was completely gone. Cut out and burned. The boundary held. I placed the phone on the metal footlocker. I lay back on the thin, stiff mattress. The artillery hammered the earth somewhere miles above my head, but inside the wire, everything was quiet. I closed my eyes. For the first time in 20 years, I actually slept. A deep, dreamless, unbroken sleep. The months bled together. February, March, April. My mind was a razor. When you stop burning all your energy trying to keep a broken family afloat, you realize how much power you actually have in reserve. I was no longer distracted by past due notices or screaming matches across an ocean. I was completely dialed in. My tactical assessments were flawless. Strike coordination was executed with absolute brutal efficiency. I caught threat patterns that entire intelligence divisions missed. The Department of Defense performance reviews came back down the chain of command. Perfect scores, unprecedented clearance rates. I spent my entire adult life paying off someone else's emotional and financial debt. I bled myself dry to build their stage. Not anymore. I was finally building my own empire. I was taking the glory I actually earned. June arrived. The heat on the surface was hot enough to melt the rubber soles off your combat boots. We were in the middle of a massive joint task force briefing. The air in the command center was thick, tense. It smelled like stale coffee and nervous sweat. 5 senior intelligence officers stood around the heavy metal map table, arguing over a high-value target extraction in hostile territory. I stood at the head of the table, back straight, shoulders locked. I watched them argue, my eyes scanning the topographical maps, waiting for the exact moment to shut them down and issue the final order. The heavy steel door of the bunker suddenly clicked open. Every head in the room snapped up. You do not interrupt a closed-door tactical briefing. You do not break that protocol. Captain Layla Moreno stepped into the room. She did not look at the other officers. She walked straight past them. Her combat boots echoed sharply against the concrete floor. She stopped right in front of me. Moreno is a stone wall. She never breaks character. But right now, standing in a room full of stressed, sweating men, she had a wide, rare smile stretching across her face. She held something in her hands. It was a small, polished oak box. She did not hand it to me. She leaned forward and placed it directly in the center of the map table, right on top of the hostile grid coordinates. "We just received a direct encrypted transmission, Colonel," Moreno said. Her voice cut through the dead silence of the room. Straight from the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon. I looked down at the dark wood of the box. The polished oak box sat dead center on the topographical map, right over a red hostile grid coordinate. No one in the bunker breathed. The heavy industrial air scrubbers hummed in the background, pushing cold air into the subterranean room. I stared at the box. The massive secure monitor mounted on the concrete wall suddenly crackled to life. The blue radar screen vanished, replaced by a high-definition feed from a secure conference room in Arlington, Virginia. The Pentagon. Sitting at the head of a long mahogany table was General Thomas Keane. Behind him sat the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a solid wall of 4-star brass. I snapped to attention, back straight, shoulders locked. The other 5 senior officers in the bunker instantly followed suit, their boots cracking hard against the dusty concrete floor. "At ease!" Keane's voice rumbled through the heavy bunker speakers. The gravel in his throat was unmistakable. He leaned forward, resting his thick forearms on the table. "Colonel Brown," Keane said, his eyes locking onto the camera lens. "I have read the after-action reports. Your tactical precision over the last 6 months is unmatched. Your discipline saved the lives of countless operators in that sandbox. You held the line when it mattered most. He paused. The silence in the underground room was deafening. But you have outgrown that rank, Keen continued. His voice dropped, carrying the heavy weight of a massive command. It is time for you to carry a heavier pack. Keen nodded at the screen. Captain Moreno, open it. Layla Moreno stepped up to the table. She reached out and unlatched the small brass lock on the oak box. She flipped the lid back. I looked down. It was not the silver eagle of a colonel. Resting on a bed of dark velvet was a solid silver 5-pointed star. Congratulations, Brigadier General Laura Brown, Keen said. He stood up from his heavy leather chair. The entire row of Pentagon brass stood with him. Keen raised his right hand in a slow razor-sharp salute. I raised my hand and returned it. My fingers trembled just for a fraction of a second before I locked them into place. Captain, Keen ordered over the feed. Pinner. Moreno picked up the heavy silver star. She stepped right in front of me. She reached up to my camouflage collar, removed the old eagle, and pushed the sharp metal pins of the star straight through the thick fabric. The cold metal pressed hard against my collarbone. A physical anchor, a permanent mark. She stepped back and saluted. Every single officer in the concrete bunker snapped to attention. They did not just salute, they erupted. Heavy clapping, cheering. The raw, unfiltered sound of combat veterans honoring one of their own. The noise bounced off the thick concrete walls, drowning out the hum of the servers and the distant thud of artillery. 20 years. 2 decades of eating dirt, bleeding in the sand, and swallowing my pride while my family treated me like a broken ATM. I survived the shrapnel. I survived the gaslighting. I did the work in the dark. And now the greatness finally called my name. I walked out of the bunker. I needed air. I climbed the heavy steel stairs and pushed open the reinforced surface hatch. The dry, brutal heat of the Middle Eastern desert hit my face. It was the middle of the night. Millions of stars burned like white fire across the pitch-black sky. I pulled the satellite phone from my tactical vest. I dialed the Virginia area code. It was mid-morning back in the States. The line clicked, hissing with the encrypted connection. Laura. It was Elise. She answered on the first ring. No heavy sigh, no passive-aggressive greeting. Just my name. I took a slow, deep breath of the dry desert air. I looked up at the endless sky. Hey, I said, my voice steady. I have an update. The Pentagon just bumped me up. A short pause on the line. Bumped you up? Yeah, I said. I let my hand rest on the cold silver star pinned to my collar. 1 star, General. There was a second of absolute dead silence. Then the speaker exploded. It was not the bitter, jealous screeching from Thanksgiving. It was a massive, ear-piercing scream of pure, unadulterated joy. Oh my God! Elise shrieked. The phone fumbled in her hands. I could hear her sprinting down a hallway, her voice echoing wildly. Mom. Ryan. Get out here, Laura made General. Oh my God, she is a general. I could hear the absolute chaos erupting in my mother's house. I heard Ryan shouting in disbelief. I heard my mother crying, not the manipulative, guilty tears she used to weaponize, but actual, genuine tears of pride. They were cheering for me, not for my paycheck, not for what I could buy them. They were cheering for the woman I had become. I lowered the phone from my ear. I stood in the dirt listening to the tiny, joyful screams echoing from the plastic speaker. A slow smile spread across my face. The war was over. I was Brigadier General Laura Brown, a commander protecting a nation and a woman who had fought through hell to take back her own dignity. Listen to me. If you are sitting there right now, letting your own bloodline treat you like a mindless ATM, if you are letting their arrogant egos crush your spirit just to keep the peace, stand up. Cut the supply line. Establish a perimeter of solid steel. Sometimes calculated ruthlessness is the greatest act of love you can give them. And more importantly, it is the respect you owe to yourself. If you are ready to stop bleeding for people who do not respect your scars, and if you are finally ready to fight for your own dignity, do me a favor. Drop the word freedom in the comments right now. Let me know you are taking your life back. I will see you on the high ground.